Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin.
Dr. Pak is back. Dr. Pak Androulakis-Korakakis. I love saying the name. Well, I've had some practice at it now. So my old friend, PhD, sports science, and you got a new book out now, Train Smarter, Not Longer, and he's holding it up for people who got the video. Ooh.
The cringe blur setting on Zoom is ruining the visual experience of the cover, which is basically just the title. But nonetheless, yeah, book's out. You can check it out on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes and Noble in the US, a bunch of places, but check it out. If you want to learn more about the magic of the minimum effective dose, cue sound. Beep, beep, beep.
Okay, that was more animated than I usually get. So, what is the minimum effective dose for muscular development? I know it's very broad because it probably is different across different populations, but let's start.
I mean, the book is essentially one page, just copy pasted 200 times, where it just says, just do something. But no, joking aside, the minimum effective dose is a magical method that I single-handedly discovered one day. I'm joking again. So this is two jokes back to back. I'll stop now. It is essentially the concept, and it's not a concept that applies just to lifting weights, but essentially to many other fields. For example, pharmacology, and it's essentially it tries to answer the question of what's the least you need to do in order to see meaningful results. In our world, that's meaningful results in terms of muscle growth and strength. So what's the least I can get away with and still get bigger or stronger or both?
Define meaningful results.
Yeah, so obviously that's the tricky part. For the majority of people, or I'd say 99.9%, meaningful gains as far as muscle growth goes would be gains that result in visual changes where you can detect that you're actually looking bigger, clothes are fitting differently, you can measure your arms and it's slightly bigger versus like an ultrasound measurement. And on strength, meaningful gains. Although we do have some studies that have quantified what meaningful means in certain contexts, like in powerlifting. In practice, it is essentially the amount of training that you need in order to increase your strength by a substantial amount and hit PRs. Now, that definition of meaningfulness will shift for both muscle gained and strength gained as you become a more advanced trainee. So much like yourself, if I told you, hey, you may get a 40-pound PR in a year and a half on one of your, favorite lifts that you've been training, I assume you'd be ecstatic.
I
Exactly.
mean, I'd be ecstatic with 4 pounds at this
Exactly.
advanced stage of, lifting career.
Same with muscle growth. If I said, hey, after a year of consistently training, you may look in the mirror and go, you know what? I think I'm looking a bit bigger. That for you is meaningful. For many people out there, like for less advanced individuals, that may not be as meaningful. So obviously, we gotta adjust our expectations.
I think about, you said the minimum effective dose can apply to a lot of things. So I immediately think of, we sort of redefined the 10,000 steps a day as, we know that about 7,000 seems to be where we get very good returns on effort. And then there sort of gets into diminishing returns. I know that when people lose a certain amount of their body fat, or their certain amount of their weight, I guess, usually in body fat, when we see people lose about 5 to 10% of their mass, they see some pretty substantial improvements in long-term metabolic health outcomes. So I think those are pretty good starting points for a lot of the population that's otherwise probably not overly healthy or athletic. I can understand why for muscle and strength, it's probably harder to pin down a more absolute band that applies to most people. Or do you think there is one?
There is for sure. If we look at the latest meta regression by Pell and Tal, where they essentially looked at, okay, what's the amount of training volume that we need in order to essentially gain enough muscle to the point where we're and I'm explaining this in very simple terms, we are at least statistically certain to an extent that that gain is actually there and it's not like a measurement error. For muscle growth, it was as low as 4 fractional sets per muscle group per week.
Mm.
And for strength, it was even lower. It was 1 set per exercise per week. But obviously, this goes back to the unfortunate reality of looking at research findings when we talk about, measurable gains and whether those correspond to visual changes. We don't know with certainty yet, but we could assume that if you're training, consistently, even with the absolute minimum effective dose training prescription, you'll gain enough muscle to look more jacked, be healthier, fitter, and so on and so forth.
Do those sets have to meet certain minimum criteria of proximity to failure, intensity, anything else?
Yeah, for sure. So in theory, yeah, you could make gains even if you're a few reps away from failure, even at like a true like 4 RIR, and I'm saying like true 4 RIR, not 4 RIR of the guy that goes to the gym and thinks he's training to failure, when in reality he's training to failure is like 2 to 4 RIR. But we have some evidence suggesting that when you're training with very low volumes, going to failure, or at least staying extremely close to failure, and sometimes going to failure, makes more sense and may return a bit more, may give you more gains. In my personal opinion, as somebody who in practice as a lifter, I train with relatively high volumes. Not every time. I toggle the minimum effective dose on during high stress periods and periods where I travel quite a bit. But if I have more time, because I'm a lifter at heart, I love being in the gym, and I'm happy to dedicate a couple of hours a day to lifting. Even in that scenario, I'm happy to take all sets to failure. Sorry, random tangent. Back to minimum effective dose.
Sure.
If you're going to do 4 to 10 sets, because even in the book, I talk about how if you're an advanced trainee and you fall in a certain you fall in a certain archetype. So if you and I, right? We are people who lift not because we want to just be healthy, fit, and strong. We want to get as jacked as our genetics allow, and we're happy to chase diminishing returns and even chase no gains to an extent after a point. We're happy to just be in the gym and believe that we can make gains. For people like us and more advanced trainees that may be listening to this podcast, I do recommend going higher than just 4 sets, staying in these 6 to close to 10 fractional sets per week per muscle group, just because you're not spending that much more time in the gym by doing a few extra sets. And we do see in the volume literature that obviously the more you do, the more you get, but heavy diminishing returns start kicking in after 10, 20, like 20 sets for sure. After 10, they're not as hard, but you're still getting diminishing returns. And that 10-ish, so it could be 6 to 10 fractional sets per week. That's a nice minimum effective dose plus sweet spot, without that meaning that just because you're advanced, your physiology changes and you need more than 4 sets. So yeah, hard sets to failure.
Can you define fractional sets for anybody who's going, I've never heard that before.
Really? So in the Pellant, yeah, it's been all the rage, and I've been doing content in Greek as well, and like people are even debating it there. But I guess it has become so intuitive to me to think of volume as fractional sets, because that's how I semi-thought before the Pellant analysis. Essentially, fractional sets will count each exercise. The prime mover of that exercise will count the volume for the prime mover of an exercise. So let's say you're doing bench press, you'll count the 1 set as 1 set for your chest and half a set for your triceps. Now, this is not some absolute and perfect way to count volume, and it doesn't necessarily mean that in every exercise, like on a chin-up, we don't know if a chin-up counts as half a set for your bicep or 0.8 sets for your bicep, especially if you go close to failure. However, in their analyses, using fractional sets was shown to be the best way, essentially, to explain the relationship between volume and hypertrophy, to put it simply. And it's a very simple way to essentially count volume in practice with some terms and conditions. But if you are doing 4 fractional sets per muscle group per week, unless your exercise selection is absolutely YOLO, you are likely covered. You could still count direct sets though, but then that brings the minimum effective dose likely lower than 4 fractional sets. So it could be maybe let's just say 4 sets, even if you're counting direct sets. I don't want to push anybody to way too low volumes here.
And when we say we're talking about sets here, fractional or otherwise, we are also talking about working sets too, right? Sets
Just
that
working sets.
gets close enough to failure to create that stimulus.
Yes, exactly. So you wouldn't count an easy warm-up set as a working set. So 4 fractional sets, those sets being hard sets. So for your chest, that could be 2 sets of incline dumbbell press and 2 sets of flies. That's your minimum effective dose for your chest for the week, assuming that those sets are 2 or very close to failure. And you'd obviously accumulate about 1 set from those 2 incline dumbbell press sets for your triceps and front delts. So it's very easy to accumulate 4 fractional sets for many muscle groups. Some other muscle groups will need direct work because you want to randomly train your, your lats doing whatever chest work or, bicep work. But yeah, things are looking good, man. Unfortunately, as much as I would love to, and from a marketing perspective, I'd be in a much better place if I approached, if I became the minimum dose guru where I said, you know what, they've been lying to you and all you need is, X amount and doing more is just edema, or the diminishing returns are so insane that you shouldn't chase them, or that all research is flawed. Because that's not difficult to do, and you could make a case for it for those that don't really know. You could convince them, but I think that everybody wins. If you're a minimalist, hey, you can make up to it's difficult to say a percentage of your potential gains because we haven't found that 100%. We haven't found the ceiling yet. But if we assume that the highest volume at the moment is the ceiling, you could make like roughly 1/3 of your gains with 4 fractional sets, which is great, which is insane. And going slightly above that, you're getting closer to like half of your potential gains, which is also insane. And then you'd need to like triple or even quadruple in some cases the volume to reach that theoretical 100%. So for the minimalist, great news. For the maximalist, hey, bad news in the sense that if you're a bodybuilder, you should try to do more if you can do more, but also good news for people like us, because if I want to spend 7 days a week in the gym going YOLO, I can do so and at least tell myself, hey, I didn't waste time because those extra 20 sets I did, sure, diminishing returns, but I'll take it.
A lot of what you just said sort of explains the almost the battleground, the dichotomy of the way that a lot of the low volume versus high volume camps. And I think a lot of that stuff is straw man, and they don't necessarily agree upon definitions of everything anyway. And a lot of it's brand positioning, kind of what you were sort of making fun of. But we do see a lot of these absolute statements. And I had Dr. Eric Helms on very recently to kind of break down the flaws in those absolute statements that we're often seeing in the, as I lovingly like to say, the hypertrophy bros who are LARPing as exercise research interpreters, yet have no academic background to be able to do it. But then they seem to think they know more than people with, PhDs like you, Eric, Brad Schoenfeld.
It's not even about the credentials. Like if what you're saying is supported by evidence, then you don't need a PhD. You could be somebody literally that has never stepped foot in a school, and you'd still be right. But in that case, what happens is people will essentially ignore the literature or say things like, "Oh, it doesn't count because insert something they heard somewhere like edema." They will try to say, "Okay, if the relationship between strength and volume is different, then it doesn't make sense that it's different also for hypertrophy. So if strength gains plateau, then with low volumes, then why don't it doesn't make sense that hypertrophy gains don't plateau." So whatever, they'll say something, but the difference here is that a lot of the people that are communicating the literature, because there's no bias here. There's nothing I'd want more than 20 studies to come out in the next 20 years and say, hey, look, you can maximize gains with 10 sets, 5 sets, 3 sets, whatever, low volumes. That'd be great. I'd feel a bit like a loser that I did a ton of volume, but I'd be like, you know what? This is amazing. This is insane for from a general health perspective and for us, the freaks perspective. However, the Difference here is that a lot of the people that are communicating the literature are also lifters. And a lot of the cope that you hear for high volume is that people who train with very low volumes as their default, as their way to maximize gains, they buy into the idea that those sets are going to be extremely hard. They get very psychologically amped to go to failure. And because they never do more volume, they assume that, okay, it's impossible to train extremely hard and do a lot of sets. But much like anything, if you slowly get accustomed to it, because nobody's advocating that you up the volume by 300% from one week to the other, you also get used to it. So in this case, you have people like Eric Helms, myself, many others who are also lifters and lifters that have been doing the thing for years. Eric is a pro natural bodybuilder and he trains twice a day some days and does 30 plus sets for some muscle groups per week, all very closer to failure. So I'm glad to also have a bunch of other people essentially saying the same thing and trying to denocebo people away from the idea that, oh, you cannot train hard and do a bunch of volume. But I'm also here to deliver the message that, hey, if you don't want to chase diminishing returns, you can make amazing gains with low volumes. I yapped a lot there, my man. I apologize.
No, it's wonderful. It breaks it down really well because two seemingly contradictory things can simultaneously be true. I just think that's kind of presented as a false dichotomy. There's two things you said throughout what we've talked about so far that I think speak to both camps. I think let's go to the first one. We are a very small minority of the walking around population in terms of our love for this, how seriously we take it. And the message I take from what you're sharing is that this is more accessible to more people. And if we get people to understand, hey, you don't need that much volume to get pretty decent muscle growth, which is going to benefit you tremendously for your metabolic health, for your bone mineral density, for your long-term metabolic health risk outcomes, and your independence. Like a lot of really goddamn good shit. It's good for
Mm-hmm.
your blood pressure, good for your blood glucose. Then we can probably get more people in the gym and getting those benefits when they probably have an idea, well, those meatheads or whatever, these people who live in the gym all the time, I'm not that kind of person. Therefore, it becomes a very good narrative not to start. I think that's probably my favorite takeaway from this.
Yes, for sure. Plus, even for people like us, there is because I'm sure that as a coach, as indicated by your cap, or as a AUK, or however you pronounce it the other way around. Sorry, that joke for those that are listening. Coach is backwards on his hat. Sorry, my apologies. I'm 32. I can make dad jokes. But the good thing is that for people like us or advanced trainees, and I'm sure you've worked with many individuals who will get stressed when life gets in the way, the minimum effective dose is the way to stay on the gain train forever. And that goes for everyone, but also for people like us. Because at the end of the day, even if you're not theoretically in the optimal or the maximum gains zone, by still being in the gym and training with a minimum effective dose when shit gets hard, and at some point it will, you'll have a family, you'll have a job, you'll have something. That way, you're still progressing and you're still, staying on the gain train versus taking a few weeks off, having potentially your having the negative psychological effects of that. And then for some people, and I'm sure you've seen that, even those who were lifters back in the day and saw insane gains, there's many people that when priorities change because they can't do the 4 or 5 sessions a week, they choose to completely stop lifting. And I've seen way too many people that you wouldn't expect would stop lifting. So for the minimalist or for Gen Pop individuals, insane news, amazing gains with very low volumes. For people like us, yes, it shouldn't be our default if we're trying to get as jacked as possible, but we can still toggle minimum effective dose either for muscle groups we don't really care about, where we want to focus on other muscle groups, or during periods where, hey, I'm not feeling like chasing diminishing returns for 2 months because I got a promotion or whatever. Or I'm working on a paper, and this means much more to me than spending the extra 5 hours a week in the gym.
And the second thing that you said, certainly alluded to, that I believe it is that I think there are some people who look at lifting through the exclusive lens of the muscular gains. That is their only purpose for doing it.
Mhm.
You and I, many other people, we love the experience of lifting. We usually have the time to do it. It's part of our identity, part of our life. Some people might criticize that. Different people have different priorities. I certainly think it's great for my mental health. I think it's great for my metabolic health. And it's very experiential. It's very net positive for me as a whole. I
Mhm.
think there's also some tactical stuff too. Like when I hear people make explicit statements like you never need to do more than 6 reps, I have all kinds of problems with that rhetoric because I still coach real people and I am a hard ass about this. When I hear people say that, I'm like, you haven't coached people in person in years. Maybe you never did, right? And that's not to say it's necessarily a bad thing, but when I'm working with older adults, when I'm working with a lot of women, when I'm working with new trainees, the idea behind a set of 6 being effective for muscle building also presumes that it's very close to failure, which also means that it's very heavy to be limited to 6 reps to near failure. And that doesn't work physically or psychologically for a lot of people. And there's some people who will scream otherwise. I'm like, no, you're full of shit. You do not coach these populations. Maybe for younger lifters. I'm 48. There are a
You're
few
48.
joints. I'm 48. Yeah. There's a few
Wow.
joint. Yeah, lifting a long time. But my left shoulder doesn't tolerate certain things. My right knee doesn't love some shit. And I do like to lift lower rep to, lower RIRs, sure. But there are certain loads that I would need to hit to actually get really close to failure, like RIR 1 to 0, that my knee and my shoulder orthopedically do not tolerate. They will absolutely not do well with it. So if I do extra sets at a slightly higher reps in reserve, at a slightly higher rep range, guess what? I walk away from my workout feeling really good. I get good tension on muscle. I'm not overly fatigued. I will take the extra time. And that has been a recipe for me. And it's just like this narrative that there's only one way to do it discounts what I think is the experience of far more people. Yes, if you look at this through the lens of the young, fairly experienced guy with no orthopedic injury history. And also, I think there's a bit of a bias because I'm also 6'2", longer limbs. So, I mean, you've met me in person, Pack. You know how tall I am. You know this
Yeah,
place.
that's true. It's been a while though. It's been what?
And so
Five
if you,
years?
yeah, because, well, I'm pretty sure it was 2002. You, me, Stu Phillips, Brad Schoenfeld were all speaking at it. Mike T. Nelson was there hanging out with us in Minneapolis at Luke Carlson's resistance exercise conference. That was fun.
Awesome.
But again, for certain type of exercises, you're dealing with the physics of moment arms, like the limb length, the lever length of these things. And at certain loads, and I've seen people who will fight about this. I'm like, no, I think you're densely muscled. I think you're shorter. I think you have shorter limb segments. And I don't think you have any sort of orthopedic issues. And there are certain exercises that I do not believe for most populations work to a near to at failure rep range of 6 reps to be that heavy to get it to failure. And again, this is just practical experience with a lot of people and my own experience. This is why I just push back so hard at this absolute statement.
Yeah, I agree. Allow me to say you look insane for 48. Respect. Well done. For people watching, for people that are listening, listen to that voice. Joking aside about that second part, yeah, I don't get the need to be absolute. I'm also a big proponent of like if you're a hypertrophy enthusiast and you're feeling good, stay in the 5 to 10 rep range because you'll be, your ability to gauge proximity to failure will be better. And it doesn't make sense to just do high reps for the sake of doing high reps. But at the same time, similarly, when I coach, I don't just prescribe 6 reps to everything because people have injuries, personal preferences, and sometimes some exercises feel some way. And based on the literature, we do know that you can get the same gains with pretty much any rep range, assuming any rep range with a big asterisk there. I'm not talking about sets of 50, but most definitely like sets of 10 to 20 as long as you can get close to failure. But this goes back to the need to be absolute, the need to create camps. I am the high volume guy, or I am the low volume guy, or I am the only 6 reps guy, and what they're telling you is killing your gains, or they're BSing you. I'm not. which is good for business, but unfortunately is not good for many people that consume that sort of content, because then they fall in the trap of thinking anything more than 6 reps, oh, the fatigue monster is going to get me, or I'm wasting my time.
A quick break from this episode to shout out RP Strength and the RP Hypertrophy app. I have a big confession. I've never used a coach before. I've always auto-regulated my training for decades. But I've known Dr. Mike Isertel and Nick Shaw, the founders of RP, for years, and I'll get behind anything they create, including years of reading their books, consuming their media, attending their seminars, and having them as guests on the show. And I've been using the RP Hypertrophy app now for several months. And several things have happened. It forced me to make smaller and more gradual but better increases in weight volume across time, like putting 5-pound plates on each side of a leg press. Like, who does that? Never before. Only 45s. It cut out the junk volume. It made my workouts faster and more efficient. I show up with a plan. I didn't have to think about what to do. I feel more accountable having a log my progress. And I don't skip things because I don't feel like. If hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to manage your gains and to take the guesswork out of your program. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free, and if you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. I've also got you a $50 US dollar discount, so go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes. That's rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP.
The fatigue monster, and that's, you said it earlier, and from my practical experience too, I just don't think that fatigue becomes this demonstrable thing. And I had an episode with Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum recently, and he went really hard into the research, or the lack thereof, on this concept of overtraining. Emily Dow also recently made similar comments that, especially when you look at experienced lifters, experienced runners, athletes, whatever, they seem to be able, as long as you graduate the load intensity and volume, and you can eat enough. A lot of it's just eating and being able to sleep. It's your recovery that is a limiting factor. But if you can recover from the training volume, you can do the training volume. And it just does not seem to be strong evidence that anyone has, or even be able to define what overtraining even is. It just doesn't seem to exist in the research.
Yes, bro. And Lee Bell has done, out of Sheffield Hallam University, has done some great things. He also looked at overtraining occurrence in strength sports in the literature, and even in strength sports, true overtraining syndrome is rare, if not non-existent. People also mistake, oh, I have a life and 3,000 other stressors, and I'm training hard, and at some point I felt a bit fatigued and sore. And obviously they discount the idea of like, hey, the way you perceive pain or fatigue may be different to, you may be more prone to perceiving it a certain way. Anyways, real overtraining syndrome is a serious thing, and it's something that you have to actively push against. So you have to go and train while sleep is out the window for, a bunch of days, or if not weeks. Your appetite, mood, performance, everything will be suffering. And in order to truly overtrain, you have to still push through that. That's why we see it occur so much in elite athletes. Not so much. That's why we see it more in elite sport, where, with athletes who sometimes are also trying to make weight, and obviously their livelihood depends to an extent on performing, and they're doing insane amounts of they're training multiple physical qualities simultaneously, and they're doing everything for a while, and they are pushing through pain, they're pushing through bad sleep, and that's when they overtrain. But for the average lifter out there, and I'll say this, I said it somewhere else as well, I do think that a lot of supposedly hardcore lifters are not as hardcore as they think. And if you train to failure and you do more volume over time, assuming that you are, not in a big calorie deficit, and you're not the most stressed person, and you're not working in a coal mine, you will eventually be able to do a bunch of training volume, recover just fine, and even train without rest days for a while if you're managing your training appropriately. So this idea that you'll all of a sudden get super fatigued and you're not going to make gains, sure, you may overdo it a couple of times here and there, but it's not a big deal. Assuming that you're not pushing through clear signs that you're massively overdoing it, which I don't think is an issue. I don't think people are out there not making gains because they're too fatigued. I think people are not training hard enough and they're not training consistently enough.
And to oversimplify, we're talking in terms of the theoretical overtraining of something that would be so much training as you're no longer in the land of diminishing returns, but you're actually negatively impacting yourself. We're not talking about injury risk because that's more of a load management thing. Can you increase your load intensity and volume too quickly to increase your injury risk and therefore suffer injuries? Absolutely. That's different.
Yeah, for sure. And even with injury, like when we look at the literature on weightlifting, powerlifting, and bodybuilding, weightlifting and powerlifting, which are literally you chasing the absolute maximum amount that you can lift in 3 lifts and 2 lifts in weightlifting. Even in that case, where you see people performing a ton of volume with heavy loads, yada, 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 and doing the same movements over and over and over again, even there, the injury incidents, then like compared to more traditional sports like soccer, you have like 4 to 5 times less injuries. Plus, the injuries that you usually see in the strength sports are minor injuries. And then when you look at bodybuilding, injuries are even less. And if you're a hypertrophy enthusiast, the amount of flexibility that you have, and this goes back to what you said with rep ranges, is so vast that let's say deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts with a barbell start bothering your lower back. You can do single leg dumbbell RDLs. You could break up the musculature trained in the RDL and train it with separate exercises. You can do slow tempo with a pause, with very light loads, and essentially and do bilateral work. Unilateral work. You could do 10, 12, 15, 20, 25 reps. You could do just partials at long muscle lengths. You can change exercise every other week depending on how they feel. So you have so many options where even in the slightest pain or whatever ache from, like, let's say training very hard with high volumes, you can work around it so easily where I think it's a non-issue for many. Obviously, there are exceptions. There's people that have suffered actual injuries. But for the majority of people, and I'll use me as an example, my knee was bothering me a few weeks ago, quite a bit, even while driving. Worked around it, changed my exercise a bit, changed loads. It's back to normal now. My anecdote doesn't mean much, but I'm just using it to demonstrate how, in practice, you have so much flexibility.
Hmm. I'll circle back to another thought, and I think this can go both ways. So let's say you've got, let's call them vulnerable populations. Older adults maybe don't have much muscle mass, didn't grow up in an environment where training was accessible or encouraged. They're facing metabolic health issues. Menopausal women certainly are a demographic that are heavily marketed towards now, including a lot of misleading stuff. I've had a bunch of guests on talking about that. Is there an argument that the minimum effective dose, I can see it both ways. Like we said before, where these populations are doing nothing, getting them to do the minimum effective dose is a very good idea. But if they are vulnerable, let's say the older adult with lower muscle mass, bone density, is the minimum effective dose enough?
Oh, yeah, that was the end of the question. Sorry,
That's the
it
end of the
seemed like
question. Yeah.
you had more. Yeah, I think most certainly, especially when we look at the data on like strength adaptations. For example, there was a study, classic paper that I had the honor to be part of, where we analyzed data from a gym chain in the Netherlands, where their motto is 20 minutes of resistance training per week. And we had data for over 15,000 people for 7 years. And all they did was one set on 4 to 6 different exercises, 4 to 6 reps on each set to failure. So 20 minutes of lifting per week. And we're talking about people roughly in their 50s, and 60% of them were women. And they saw gains in strength 50% above their baseline for a year or so. And then those gains started plateauing. They still trended upwards, but obviously they were just doing 20 minutes per week. So when we're talking about 4 relatively hard sets per muscle group per week, when it like for even for older individuals, that will land them close to maybe 40 to 60 minutes of lifting per week, which if we then look at the literature on resistance training and all-cause mortality, about 60 minutes per week, and obviously that's based on a slightly older analysis, that yields the maximum reduction in the risk for all-cause mortality, which is around 27%. And based on data on trained individuals, so we recently published a study called, I don't remember the exact, it's Without Fail is the beginning of the title, but essentially we looked at single sets where in trained individuals that were doing more training volume, and we looked at whether going close to failure or staying or being or training to failure with single sets, roughly 4 fractional sets per muscle group per week, whether there was a difference. Even in trained individuals that were doing more training volume before, about 4 sets a week still led to at least big gains when it comes to gains that we usually observe in the literature. So for the average or for the older individual out there, minimum effective dose, even if you stay at the bottom end, you're looking at really meaningful gains in my opinion, more than enough for increases in muscle mass and big improvements as far as overall life quality goes.
That's reassuring because I look at it through the lens of as you get older, it's harder to recover from the training volume. Your adaptations are slower. But I'm thinking in terms of building peak muscle and peak bone to stay above this conceptual line or threshold of independence as we get older. And
Mhm.
so if we've got someone who probably did not take advantage of their younger years, their best time to build the absolute peak muscle and bone density, I now feel confident that I guess the other key is they've got to keep it up. You can't just do it for a while and stop. But if you keep it up, you still stand an excellent chance of maintaining the improvements in your metabolic health and independence. Feel
For
confident saying
sure.
that?
Yeah, you may not build as much muscle as you would have theoretically built if you had started younger, but you know, you'd much rather do something and still build some muscle and still get your bones to be stronger
Mm.
and more and increase bone density than do nothing. That's for sure. Like I'm very confident in saying that because there is some evidence that does indicate that if you are like if you're 70 years old and you've never lifted in your life, you may not build as much muscle as if you started lifting when you were 15 and
Mm.
did it for 40 years. But still, everybody can benefit from the concept of the minimum dose. And I do think, and that's something I've said before, that for older individuals or individuals who may not be very familiar with the gym environment, getting them to lift on machines and encouraging them to go to the gym, I think is a better way. And I'm not an expert in this. I'm happy to be wrong
Mm.
because there are people that work specifically with those populations. But I do feel that it's better for their adaptations if they can actually push hard in a controlled environment versus
Mm.
doing just body weight stuff at home or, resistance bands. There's exceptions, right? If you're 85 years old with multiple injuries, maybe you can't even go to the gym. But if you can go to the gym and sit on a chest press and just press, even if you're pressing one
Mm.
plate, which is heavy for you, I think that's much better because you can work up to a high intensity of effort over time and actually train close to failure, which is totally fine, even if you're an older individual, as long as you do it safely.
I'm 100% on board with that argument too. Because I think for a long time we've probably over-indexed on having people do things that require more balance. I've long said that balance is a function of strength. And if you do the things that get people stronger more efficiently, and I think again, sitting in a machine, I think you get someone doing a leg press, like my client Larry. Now, uh, Larry's been out of the gym for a little while, and he'd be comfortable with me sharing this, but he actually, I haven't said this on my social media, but he actually had a brain tumor removed. It was messing with his eyesight. So if any of my listeners are familiar with my client Larry, he's strong as hell, but he's not been able to be in the gym. And the hope is we're going to get him cleared to come back in a couple months. Surgery went well, eyesight's back. Serious stuff though. Big long surgery. And but this is a guy who likes one rep max use deadlifts. We ain't gonna be allowed to do that for a while. And I don't know if he'll be cleared to lift. We'll have to really graduate him, like go super easy for a while. We'll see. So yeah, there's an update on Larry, but I texted with him yesterday and he's a little stir crazy, but he's being smart about it. He's doing what he can. Uh, Kind of off track on that thought a little bit. Forgive me. It's sort of it's a big one. I've been kind of hiding that one for a while.
Shout out Larry, though. I hope
Oh,
he.
but machines. And
Oh, there we go.
Larry, I have him do a bunch of free weight stuff. Like again, he loves a trap bar deadlift, but he can move, he used to be able to move really serious weight on a leg press. He really likes it a lot. I like having him sit in a seated cable row. And his first trainer was a friend of mine before he got out of the business and sent him to me. He worked out in the gym and he actually had him start out on a lot of machines, and Larry really liked it and made it very accessible to him. But I agree with you. You can sit in there and you can just push a ton with a chest press, very stable. And I think that strength adaptations are going to translate into someone who's probably going to have way better balance and just be more functionally okay. I do think it's wise to build in some specific movements. I think getting older adults up and down from the ground is a really important skill because they do need to have the strength and skill to get up from the ground, especially when it comes to fall risk. But so I think you make sure you have a robust training program for those people. But I agree with you. I think as a foundation, machines extremely accessible, very fun, and they can feel really strong, and it can produce a really tough training stimulus, which is good for them.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I agree with you. It's just that I do believe that at some point, yes, doing something is better than nothing, even if that sets, away from
Mm.
failure and you're just exercising either at home or doing, very light deadlifts and squats in the gym. But we also need those people to fall in to see progress and feel comfortable with the gym
Mm.
and also over time be able to push themselves a bit harder. So yeah, a combination of free weights and machines where machines, can be used as your foundation for building more muscle. And then you have your free weights for some more quote unquote functional stuff. I think that's a good way to go about it.
To my coach listeners, I have a little something of value for you, a $1,500 value seminar for just $19. But let me explain the context first. Endorsing people I know and trust is everything. My friend, Dr. Sean Pastuch, is the founder of Active Life. Sean and I have presented at fitness conferences together, and we share a philosophy on helping coaches serve their clients better and want caring professionals to stay in a fulfilling career they love. Sean and Active Life have something of value for you. If you're a fitness coach who works with clients who have pain and movement limitations, and isn't that almost every client, and you feel like you're guessing at solutions instead of following a system, Active Life's professional biomechanics assessment workshop will be of value to you. It's a 2-day live online workshop where you'll learn the foundational principles behind assessment, load management, and how to actually help clients move and feel better. This used to be a $1,500 seminar that people would fly in to attend. Right now, it's just $19. And for listeners of the show, the CEU upgrade worth $100 is completely free. Just use the code COATS at checkout. Go to the link in the description to grab your spot. Again, use the code COATS at checkout.
Are people good at estimating their proximity to failure when they're training?
So, and this is where being truly evidence-based with a capital B, maybe the red B emoji, is important. So in science, in the literature, we did a meta-analysis on the topic a few years ago, and we saw that both trained and untrained individuals roughly fall short their predictions by 1 rep. So pretty good. But that's in lab settings where you have people over you asking, okay, how many reps do you have left? How many? And then you actually go to failure. And then there were a few, I think 3 or 4 more studies, maybe even 5 that came after that showed the exact same thing, more or less, about 1 rep off. And even when we look at coaches reviewing video footage, those were also about a rep off in estimating repetitions in reserve. In practice, however, and I want your opinion as well as a fellow coach,
Mm.
and in gyms, I don't see that. And this could potentially be explained by the fact that then when we look at the literature and we look at what loads people self-select, which then goes back to the rep range discussion we had, most people self-select loads that are way too light, around 53%, which corresponds to like sets of 15, 20, 25 reps, depending on the individual. And then when we look at people's the literature on people's ability to gauge proximity to failure, after 12 reps, people are pretty bad at gauging. When they do more than 12 reps, things go off. So what I see in practice and with a lot of people that I start working with is that they go way too light. They think they're close to failure. And in some cases, they may be off by like 5, even up to 10 reps. So are people good? If they want to be, they can be pretty good, especially if they're working in low rep ranges. in practice and in gyms, has it been my experience that people are training to failure and they're good at gauging proximity to failure? No. And the same goes with many pro bodybuilders. Go watch some of Jay Cutler's old videos. Go watch a lot of the legends. Respect to them, amazing, hard trade, insane physiques, blah, 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 blah. But if you see a lot of their sets, they're not, close to failure. So why did I say that? I just said it because it's an interesting observation. But in practice in gyms, even people who have built solid physiques, I don't think really train that close to failure.
I'll try to tie something together because, and I may be stitching together narratives, pieces of
Hmm.
research that aren't fair to be stitched together. But if you look at the claims made, sometimes they're explicitly out of a, you know, piece of research. Sometimes they're the people who pretend at interpreting research. You'll hear that, okay, well, you don't need more than 6 reps to build muscle, right?
Hmm.
You'll hear that protein doesn't matter as much for building muscle, and some of the thresholds are a bit lower. And honestly, I agree with that one. I think Stu Phillips' work has been really good on that. There's research that says that carbohydrates aren't don't contribute to building muscle. I think that's a slightly questionable one. Me and Emily Dow touched on that a little bit. There are people that will say things like you don't need to be in a calorie surplus. Now, Eric Helms, our recent interview, he actually got into some nuance of that, whether or not it really is a surplus or whether you're in maintenance based on like the stimulus, that you're provided to build muscle. But it almost feels like if you tie them all together, which may not be fair, that nothing matters. Now, if you look around gyms, and I've been in gyms a long time, there's going to be people that you can tell getting good results because you can see that the physique is the result of effort. And it's uncharitable to take people in a moment snapshot, but I've worked in gyms for years, seen the same people coming in. I still think it's very beneficial for them to be in the gym. They're probably maintaining quite well. It's very healthy behavior. It's good for the mental health. But lots and lots of people who are not making progress. I suspect what you just said actually explains most of the problem, is that they're probably not coming close to the kind of training intensity. They're definitely doing plenty of volume. And I don't think the exercise selection or execution is necessarily bad. But I find it very hard to believe that all of these things somehow don't matter. The carb one in particular, I have a bit of an issue with. I think it's more of an interpretation. Carbs, are they directly as anabolic for, say, muscle protein synthesis as protein? Well, no, I suppose not. But do you need calories? And carbohydrates are one of the best sources of calories in this context for training, performance, recovery, and the fuel to build new muscle? I certainly think so. And I'm not saying you need a massive. I think the research is pretty good that we don't need these huge surpluses anymore. A small surplus is probably very effective. I would love for you to take that, tease it out, tear it apart. Your thoughts.
Yeah. So the nothing matters narrative is true and not true. So nothing matters in the sense that for carbs specifically, you don't necessarily need to focus on carbs much more. Does that mean you shouldn't eat carbs or carbs are not going to benefit you whatsoever? No, you need calories, as you said. You also probably like eating foods with carbs. Foods that have carbs are also great sources of other things that you need in your diet, like fiber, which is very important for health. Um, can carbs improve performance in the gym? Yes. Do you need a ton of them based on the literature? No. Do we know that that will necessarily help you build more muscle? Not necessarily, but that doesn't mean that carbs are useless. It just means that, hey, it's not your carbohydrate intake that's been holding you from making gains. And as long as you're eating some carbs, you're fine. With protein, sure, diminishing returns after a point, but still getting 1.6 grams or 2 grams per kilo of body weight in, that still requires some effort. Just because we are in an echo chamber where that's the norm, that doesn't mean that people won't benefit from it. But the main thing that will get you gains is consistently lifting with a high intensity of effort, which is where most people fail. Also, expectations. And again, echo chambers and standards that we set in our circles, social circles, a 5 plate deadlift is nothing crazy. It's not something I'll look at and be like, wow, 5 plates. or being relatively, advanced in the gym or whatever. And online, what happens is only a few have a voice, and usually those who are bigger or naturally are able to get super lean or are pretty strong. Those are the people that you usually see. So then the average person's expectations, and sometimes our expectations, our coaches, is that everybody can get extremely jacked, when in reality, that's not the case. Genetics play a huge role. And because things are relatively simple as far as making them the big gains, that's where you see people that don't really know what they're doing, but they're in the gym 4, 5, 6 days a week. They're training hard. They're doing all sorts of bro shit that they don't need to do. But at the end of the day, they are doing multiple exercises, enough training volume. So, because we know that even if they're doing 10 to 20 sets or like 6 to 15 sets, they're still going to get a ton of gains. They're going close to failure, doing assisted reps, whatever BS they may be doing, without really knowing what they're doing. And because they have solid genetics and good, muscle insertions and muscle bellies, they look jacked. They may also be following some sort of bro diet or doing some sort of crazy BS where, again, they're ticking all the basic boxes, calories, protein, and they're eating veggies because, that's what their favorite bodybuilder said. And all that to say that, one, most people out there are not consistent. They're not training for 10, 15, 20 years while also, eating enough for certain periods of time and maybe gaining a bit of body weight. And at the same time, we have to accept that not everybody will look absurdly jacked, especially if you're natty. I weigh 200 pounds now. I'm relatively lean as a natty at 5'10". And if I wear super baggy clothes, sure, like if you have a trained eye, you'll see that I lift, but it's not that I will look as impressive as some of the freaks that you see online with elite genetics and on PDs. So if you're a natty who's also not blessed structure-wise, genetics-wise, strength-wise, you may never hit a six-plate deadlift. You may never get to the point where you are X amount of weight lean, but you can definitely get much more jacked than you are. But if you fall in the trap of thinking, I must be doing something wrong, is it the carbs? Is it the protein? It's not. It may just be that that's where your limit is. Same with every other sport. Not everybody will be an amazing sprinter or an amazing endurance athlete. But when it comes to muscle growth, expectations are different, and people don't want to accept that, hey, it may not be the case. And that's my take.
A quick pause for a sponsor shout out. I've been working with Train Heroic for several rounds of my online programs, and I'm working on expanding what I offer through the platform. Train Heroic is easy to use, and my clients love it. I have friends who've sunk tens of thousands of dollars in their own app while constantly worrying and hoping that it doesn't break. Using Train Heroic means no stress for me. I trust Train Heroic's long-standing reputation for quality as an industry leader, and I know their team personally, and they're quick to come to my aid when I break things. I sometimes break things. Train Heroic is also trusted by some of the industry's best coaches, including people like Joe DeFranco, Jason Brown, Vernon Griffith, Dr. Megan Sack-Buckbina, Mike Boyle, and Angus Bradley. And we've updated your free trial with more support from the Train Heroic team and to set you up and help maximize the platform's potential. You start with a 30-day free trial, and once you sign up, I'll cover your second month. You get 60 days free total. Start your trial at www.trainheroic.com, and when the Train Heroic team reaches out, tell them you came from me and the Lift Free and Diet Art podcast, and they'll hook you up.
That makes a lot of sense. And I want to zero in on the specific part that, having coached a lot of people for a long time, anybody who was consistent for a good chunk of time made progress. And there's not just muscle. I mean, initially they absolutely make strength adaptations which occur before meaningful muscle growth. The neurological, the just motor skill, neurological efficiency. They feel better. We almost invariably, if anybody has goofy blood work, high blood pressure, blood sugar, whatever, almost invariably see that stuff improve, and fairly quickly if they're consistent. But I've seen substantial variability in people in terms of just how much muscle they put on. And I mean, I think about, like, you're describing all this stuff, me as a 24-year-old lifter who finally got really serious, had absolutely crazy progress. I know I have pretty good genes for this stuff, but you also allude to there's probably a lot of like inefficient shit that I was doing. And
Still made
I laugh.
progress.
I laugh about it now. Me and Alberto Nunez talked about it recently. And then the other thing that you said in there, and it echoes what Berto said in his recent episode with me, was that consistency is far and away the most important factor in all this stuff, long term.
Yep. And accepting that you will making the, like, as cliche as it sounds, being in it for the love of the sport being lifting itself, and loving lifting, and accepting that all you get, like, accepting that you're chasing the most jacked version of yourself. Like, if I compare certain, like, and that goes for body parts and muscularity as a whole, you may never have the bicep peaks of your favorite influencer. If you're training your biceps and you're pushing your training hard, you will know in the first few years of really hard, consistent training with nutrition and sleep on point as well, what, like, whether you have a ton of potential or not. In the first 5 to 7 years, you'll have a clear idea of whether you're relatively blessed or not. And it's not that you're missing out on something, is that you've set insane expectations, or you have a physique in mind or strength standards in mind that may be out of your reach. Focus on being in the gym, lifting, ticking all the basic boxes, and you will become the most jacked and the strongest version of yourself. What that looks like is a different story, but you should still be content, and you should fight, and I'm speaking to the listener, fight the dysmorphia and the need, or not the need, the urge to feel like, oh, I must be doing something wrong because my V taper is not insane. If you're training your back hard multiple years, and you're also, you gained a bit of weight slowly, hitting your protein, yada yada yada, and you're doing multiple exercises for your back, you're not missing out that angle. It may be that your lats are never going to be a strong part. You can blast them with volume, you can do whatever you like to get them to be slightly bigger, but you have to accept reality. And that's not me being pessimistic. That's, I think, the way for people to take a deep breath and be like, you know what? That's cool. That's fine. I don't care. And that goes for me as a lifter as well. I don't care that my biceps are not my strongest part. I train them as if they are. Um, Take Steve Hall. You're obviously aware of Steve Hall.
He's been a guest
Insane
before.
biceps.
Yep.
There's nothing I can do in my life to get my arms to look like his. And maybe from his end, he can't do anything to make some other bodybuilder look like mine, because I've been blessed with good genetics for, I don't know, hamstrings, whatever. So accepting that, I think, is key for many out there, because that's why the people fall in camps, and they want the new, this new secret. And when you tell them the basics, they're like, no, I'm doing the basics, but it doesn't work. It works, and you've gained muscle. It's just that you're expecting to look like Chris Bumstead or the 0.01% natty bodybuilder that you're seeing, and that's not going to happen.
At Dr. double underscore pack, if anybody wants to follow you on Instagram. Thank God you didn't use your last name to torture people into having to try to spell that. The book is called Train Smarter, Not Longer. My friend, I agree.
Dose.
The minimum effective dose. I really appreciate you coming on to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
And anything else you want to share with everybody? You got anything else coming up, going on? I mean, a book's enough.
We've got plenty of really cool research coming out, especially a project on whether getting stronger in training, hitting PRs, actually predicts growth. So we're analyzing a bunch of past study data. A lot of cool stuff on the stretch. I'm not going to say anything more on that. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. You're doing God's work. Big hug from the UK.
Big hug, my friend. Thank you so much.